Imagine waking up knowing that today you will be betrayed, insulted, misunderstood by those around you. Yet despite this knowledge, despite the certainty of chaos waiting beyond your door, you rise with a mind so calm it seems almost untouchable by the storms of human nature. Because you have already trained your mind to expect it, to forgive it before it even happens, to stay above it while others drown in their reactions to the very same circumstances that you face with equanimity. That was Marcus Aurelius, the emperor who ruled the greatest empire the world had ever seen. And yet his greatest conquest was not of land or people, but of himself. While others sought control over nations, over armies, over the endless territories that stretched across the known world, he sought control over something far more elusive, far more powerful, his own thoughts, his own perceptions, his own inner kingdom. And for 20 years, in a world ravaged by war, decimated by plague, torn apart by betrayal from those he trusted most, he wrote a private diary, a collection of thoughts never meant to be read by another soul, that would become the most profound manual for the human spirit ever written. Today, his 5 daily habits, practiced in the shadow of an empire's burden, could rewire your mind to face chaos with clarity, to find peace in the crushing pressure of modern life, and to master the only kingdom that ever truly mattered, yourself. This is how Marcus Aurelius lived, and this is how you can live too. We live in a world that moves faster than any empire Marcus could have imagined, where information floods our minds every second, where notifications pierce our attention like arrows, where we are connected to everything and yet feel connected to nothing at all. We live faster than ever before, consuming more, experiencing more, yet somehow we think less than we ever have, trapped in cycles of reaction rather than reflection, slaves to the momentum of a world that demands our constant participation. The average person checks their phone over 100 times a day, their mind fragmented into 1,000 pieces, never whole, never still, never truly present in the singular moment that is actually their life. We wake up anxious about what we must do, we spend our days overwhelmed by what we cannot control, and we fall asleep exhausted by a life that feels like it is happening to us rather than being created by us. This is the storm we live in, the chaos that Marcus Aurelius would recognize not as something new, but as the eternal condition of human existence, only amplified, only accelerated, only more inescapable than ever before. But there was a man, born nearly 2,000 years ago, who faced his own storm and found within it a path to unshakable peace. Marcus Aurelius became emperor of Rome in 161 AD, inheriting an empire at the height of its power, but also at the beginning of its greatest trials. He did not choose this life, it was thrust upon him by the whims of fate and the designs of his predecessor. He was a philosopher forced to become a warrior, a man who loved books and quiet contemplation forced to command armies and make decisions that would affect millions of lives. He spent years on the frontiers of the empire, fighting endless wars against Germanic tribes, living in military camps far from the comforts of Rome, witnessing death and suffering on a scale that would break most men. He watched plague sweep through his empire, killing millions, including his own wife and children. He was betrayed by those closest to him, including his most trusted general. And through it all, through every unimaginable hardship, he maintained a mind so disciplined, so clear, so unshaken that his private writings would inspire generations across millennia. Before he ruled Rome, before he commanded legions, before he held the power of life and death over millions, he learned to rule his mind, and that is where his true power came from. The question that echoes across the centuries is simple: how did he do it? How did a man bearing the weight of an empire, facing circumstances that would crush anyone, maintain such clarity, such peace, such unwavering inner strength? The answer lies not in some mystical gift, not in some superhuman ability, but in 5 simple habits that he practiced every single day, habits that shaped not just his reign, but his entire existence, and habits that you can begin practicing tomorrow morning. Habit 1: Morning clarity. At dawn, before the sun had fully risen over the hills of Rome, before the demands of empire came crashing down upon him, before generals sought his counsel and senators sought his favor, Marcus Aurelius would wake in the quiet darkness of his chambers, light a single candle, and sit with his thoughts. The city around him would still be sleeping, the world paused in that liminal space between night and day, and in that sacred silence, he would write. Today I will meet the arrogant, the ungrateful, the violent, the deceitful, he would remind himself, not as a prophecy of doom, but as a preparation of the mind, a mental rehearsal for the reality that awaited him. He was not predicting misery or inviting suffering, he was arming his mind with awareness, stripping away the delusion that today would somehow be different from every other day in human history. He knew that people would disappoint him, that circumstances would challenge him, that the world would not bend to his will simply because he was emperor, and in accepting this truth before it even arrived, he robbed it of its power to disturb him. This was his first habit: begin every day with clarity, with conscious awareness of what reality actually is rather than what we wish it would be. Marcus understood something that most of us spend our entire lives avoiding: the world does not care about your expectations, it will not conform to your desires, and if you begin each day assuming it should, you will end each day disappointed, frustrated, angry at a world that was simply being itself. So instead of waking up and immediately diving into the chaos, instead of reaching for his phone or being swept away by the urgency of others, he would sit with his thoughts, examine them, prepare them, strengthen them for what was coming. He would remind himself of his principles, of what mattered, of who he wanted to be regardless of what the day would throw at him. He would visualize the challenges ahead not with dread but with acceptance, knowing that his response to them was the only thing he truly controlled. In our modern world, we do the exact opposite. We wake up and within seconds we are scrolling through other people's lives, absorbing their anxieties, comparing ourselves to carefully curated versions of reality that bear no resemblance to truth. We let the world dictate our mental state before we have even consciously chosen what that state should be, and then we wonder why we feel so reactive, so out of control, so at the mercy of every notification and headline in crisis that demands our attention. The psychological principle at work here is called cognitive priming. The first thoughts and images you expose your mind to in the morning set the tone for your entire day, they create the lens through which you will interpret everything that follows. Marcus Aurelius understood this instinctively, which is why he never allowed the external world to be the first thing that shaped his mind. He shaped it himself, deliberately, consciously, with intention. Imagine beginning your day not by checking what everyone else is doing, not by diving into emails and demands and the endless scroll of content, but by sitting quietly with yourself, perhaps with a journal, asking, what kind of person do I want to be today? What challenges might I face, and how do I want to respond to them? What am I grateful for? What is within my control? This simple practice, this 10 or 15 minutes of morning clarity, can transform your entire relationship with life, because you are no longer being lived by the world, you are living deliberately, with awareness, with purpose. The world cannot surprise the mind that has already seen its storms, that has already accepted them, that has already decided how it will stand in the face of them. This is the power of morning clarity, the first habit that Marcus practiced until it became as natural as breathing, and it is the foundation upon which all his other habits were built. Habit 2. Control the controllables. On the frontier of the empire, far from the marble halls of Rome, Marcus Aurelius stood in a war camp surrounded by mud, blood, and chaos. The Germanic tribes were relentless, attacking with a ferocity that tested even the legendary discipline of the Roman legions. Disease swept through his army, killing more soldiers than the enemy ever could. Letters arrived bearing news of betrayal in Rome, of political enemies conspiring against him, of his own family falling apart in his absence. Everywhere he looked, there was chaos, circumstances spiraling beyond any one man's ability to control them, problems multiplying faster than solutions could be found. And yet, in the midst of this storm, in a tent lit by a flickering oil lamp, he wrote these words: "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." This was not wishful thinking or philosophical abstraction, this was the core insight that allowed him to function, to lead, to maintain his sanity when everything around him was falling apart. This was his second habit: differentiate with absolute clarity between what depends on you and what does not, between what you can control and what you cannot. The Stoics called this the dichotomy of control, and it is perhaps the most powerful psychological tool ever devised for maintaining peace of mind in an unpredictable world. Marcus understood that he could not control whether his enemies attacked, whether disease spread, whether people betrayed him, whether his plans succeeded or failed. These things were outside his power, subject to forces far beyond any individual's reach, and to spend energy worrying about them, trying to force them to be different, was not just futile but self-destructive. What he could control was his response, his perception, his judgments, his actions, his character. He could control whether he met circumstances with wisdom or with panic, with courage or with cowardice, with integrity or with compromise. And this, he realized, was enough. In fact, it was everything. Think about your own life, about how much mental and emotional energy you waste every single day trying to control things that are fundamentally beyond your control. What other people think of you, whether they approve or disapprove, whether they love you or leave you, what happens in the economy, in politics, in the weather, whether your plans work out exactly as you hoped, whether life unfolds according to your preferred timeline, whether you get sick, whether you get the promotion, whether the traffic is light or heavy. You cannot control any of these things, and yet you suffer over them constantly, your mind in a perpetual state of tension because reality refuses to bend to your will. Marcus Aurelius would look at this and ask a simple question: why are you fighting battles you can never win? Why are you exhausting yourself trying to control the uncontrollable when you could be directing that same energy toward the only thing you actually have power over, yourself? The modern parallel is everywhere. Someone cuts you off in traffic and you rage, your blood pressure spikes, your entire morning is ruined, not because of what happened but because of your reaction to what happened. A deadline approaches and you spiral into anxiety, not because the work itself is impossible but because you cannot accept that circumstances are what they are and all you can do is your best. Someone criticizes you online and you obsess over it for days, checking and rechecking, defending yourself, trying to control their perception of you, forgetting that their perception was never yours to control in the first place. This is the prison we create for ourselves, the exhausting delusion that if we just worry enough, stress enough, control enough, we can somehow force the world to be different than it is. Marcus Aurelius lived in a world far more chaotic than ours, with far higher stakes, and he found freedom not by controlling that world but by releasing his grip on what was never his to hold. He didn't conquer Rome with armies alone, he conquered it with boundaries, with the clear understanding of where his power ended and where the universe's power began, and in that understanding he found a peace that no external circumstance could take from him. When you internalize this habit, when you truly grasp that your power lies only in your response, your judgment, your character, something profound shifts, frustration transforms into clarity, anxiety transforms into acceptance, and you discover a kind of inner freedom that makes you genuinely unshakable. The external turmoil continues, the world remains chaotic, but inside, you are still, because you are no longer fighting reality, you are dancing with it, responding to it with wisdom rather than resistance. This is the second habit, and it is the one that will save you countless hours of suffering if you can only remember it when the storms come. Habit 3, the evening reflection. After the battles, after the decisions that would affect thousands of lives, after the endless meetings and judgments and responsibilities that came with absolute power, Marcus Aurelius would retreat to his quarters as the sun set over the camp. The world outside would continue its noise, soldiers would drink and talk, the wounded would moan in the medical tents, but inside his small chamber, lit only by candlelight, he would sit in solitude and reflect. This was not the time for planning the next day or reviewing tactical decisions, this was the time for something far more important, examining his own soul. He would ask himself a series of questions, questions that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. What did I do well today? Where did I fall short of my own standards? Did I act with integrity, with courage, with kindness? Did I lose my temper when I should have remained calm? Did I speak when I should have listened? Did I allow external circumstances to disturb my inner peace? These questions were not asked in a spirit of self-criticism or shame, but in a spirit of honest self-examination, the kind of ruthless honesty with oneself that allows for actual growth rather than comfortable delusion. This was his third habit: audit your soul each night, not to punish yourself for your failures, but to learn from them, to become incrementally better, to evolve. The practice came from his Stoic training, specifically from the teachings of Epictetus, who counseled his students to review each day before sleep, to examine their actions and judgments with the same care a merchant would examine his accounts. Marcus took this practice and made it his own, writing his reflections in what would become known as Meditations, a book that was never meant for publication but only for his own growth. He judged himself not to destroy his confidence but to refine his character, understanding that the unexamined life, as Socrates said, is not worth living, and that growth requires awareness of where you are falling short. In our modern world, we do the opposite. We end our days by scrolling mindlessly through social media, numbing ourselves with entertainment, avoiding any genuine reflection on who we were that day and whether we are proud of it. We go to bed with our minds full of other people's content, other people's lives, other people's problems, and we wake up the next day having learned nothing about ourselves, having made no conscious adjustments to our behavior, simply repeating the same patterns, the same reactions, the same mistakes over and over again. And then we wonder why we don't grow, why we feel stuck, why years pass and we seem to be the same person with the same problems we had 5 years ago. The reason is simple: we never stop to reflect, we never consciously examine our actions and their consequences, we never ask ourselves the hard questions that might actually lead to change. The psychological principle here is profound. Reflection consolidates learning, it takes experience and transforms it into wisdom, it allows your brain to process the day's events and extract meaningful lessons from them. Without reflection, experience is just noise, just a chaotic stream of events that wash over you without leaving any lasting impression. With reflection, every day becomes a teacher, every mistake becomes a lesson, every success becomes something you can replicate. Marcus Aurelius understood this instinctively, which is why he never let a day end without this practice, without this sacred time of honest self-examination. He knew that empires rise and fall on the quality of their leaders' decisions, and that the quality of those decisions depends entirely on the character of the person making them, and that character is not something you are born with but something you build, consciously, deliberately, through daily reflection and adjustment. Imagine ending your day not by collapsing into distraction, but by sitting quietly, perhaps with a journal, asking yourself, what am I proud of today? What could I have done better? Did I act according to my values, or did I compromise them for comfort or convenience? How did I treat the people around me? Was I present, or was I distracted? These questions, asked honestly, will reveal patterns you never noticed, will highlight areas where you are sabotaging yourself, will show you where you are growing and where you are stagnating. And over time, this nightly practice will transform you, because you will become conscious of your unconscious patterns, and consciousness is the first step toward change. He judged himself not to punish, but to evolve, and in that judgment he found the path to becoming the kind of person he wanted to be, the kind of emperor Rome needed him to be, the kind of man he could respect when he looked at himself in the mirror. This is the third habit, and it is the one that turns experience into wisdom, that transforms the chaos of life into a coherent path of growth. Habit 4. Memento Mori. The plague came to Rome like a dark tide, sweeping through the streets, the markets, the homes of rich and poor alike, killing without discrimination, without mercy, without any regard for status or power. Marcus Aurelius watched his empire die, one person at a time, including people he loved, his wife, Faustina, several of his children, friends, advisors, soldiers who had fought beside him for years. He stood at their funeral pyres, watching the flames consume their bodies, watching everything they were, everything they could have been, reduced to ash and smoke that dissipated into the Roman sky. And in those moments, facing the absolute certainty of mortality, not as an abstract concept but as a visceral reality, he understood something that most people spend their entire lives avoiding: death is not coming someday, it is here, it is now, it is woven into every moment of life, and to forget this is to waste the only thing you actually have. This was his fourth habit: remember death, not to become morbid or depressed, but to wake up to the preciousness of life. Memento mori, the Stoics called it, remember you must die. Marcus wrote in his Meditations, you could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think. This was not a depressing thought but a liberating one, because when you truly internalize the fact that your time is finite, that this day might be your last, that the people you love might not be here tomorrow, everything changes. The petty concerns that normally consume your energy suddenly seem trivial, the grudges you hold seem pointless, the time you waste on things that don't matter becomes unbearable. Death awareness does not make life darker, it makes it infinitely more vivid, more urgent, more meaningful. Marcus carried this awareness with him every day, not as a burden but as a gift, as a constant reminder to live with intention rather than sleepwalking through his years. When he faced difficult decisions, when he was tempted to compromise his principles for political convenience, when he felt the pull of anger or resentment towards someone who had wronged him, he would remember, I am going to die, perhaps today, perhaps tonight, and when I am gone, the only thing that will matter is whether I lived with integrity, whether I was the person I wanted to be, whether I wasted my finite time on earth on things that ultimately meant nothing. This awareness shaped every choice he made, every word he spoke, every action he took, because he understood that time was the one resource he could never get back, and that how he spent it was the ultimate measure of his life. In our modern world, we have become experts at avoiding death, at pushing it out of our awareness, at pretending we have infinite time to do the things we know we should do, to become the people we know we should become, to love the people we claim to love. We scroll through our phones as if we have thousands of days to waste, we stay in jobs we hate as if we will live forever, we put off meaningful conversations as if there will always be another chance, we hold grudges as if we have the luxury of carrying resentment for years. And then someone dies, someone we love or someone our age, and for a moment we wake up, we feel the fragility of existence, we promise ourselves we will live differently, but within days or weeks we slip back into the same patterns, the same illusions, the same comfortable forgetting. Marcus Aurelius would say we are already dead, that to live without awareness of death is to be a ghost, going through the motions but not truly alive. To remember death is to stop dying every day in fear, in regret, in postponement, and to start living with the urgency and gratitude that comes from knowing your time is limited. Imagine living each day as if it might be your last. Would you waste it scrolling? Would you hold on to that argument with your partner? Would you stay silent when you had something important to say? Would you avoid taking risks because you might fail? No, you would live with a clarity and purpose that most people never experience, because the shadow of death would strip away everything that doesn't matter and illuminate everything that does. This is not morbid, this is liberation, this is waking up from the dream of immortality that keeps us trapped in lives of quiet desperation. Marcus practiced this awareness daily, writing about death constantly not because he was obsessed with it but because he knew it was the ultimate teacher, the thing that could show him what actually mattered when everything else was stripped away. This is the fourth habit, and it is the one that transforms gratitude from an occasional feeling into a constant state of being, because when you remember death, every moment becomes precious, every breath becomes a gift, every person in your life becomes someone you might never see again. Habit 5, Service over self. Marcus Aurelius lived in the most opulent palace in the world, surrounded by every luxury the ancient world could offer, yet he chose to live simply, even ascetically, refusing the excesses that came with absolute power. While other emperors indulged in elaborate feasts, in harems, in displays of wealth and status, Marcus ate simple food, wore simple clothes, and spent his time not on personal pleasure but on the duties of his office, on serving the empire he had been called to lead. He could have done anything, taken anything, justified any indulgence with the simple fact of his position, but he understood something profound. True power comes not from taking but from giving, not from serving yourself but from serving something larger than yourself. He wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one." This was not a statement of superiority but of commitment, a recognition that virtue is not something you philosophize about but something you practice, every day, in every decision, regardless of whether anyone is watching. This was his fifth habit: live for virtue, not vanity, for service, not self, for contribution, not consumption. Marcus believed that human beings were fundamentally social creatures, designed to live in communities, to support one another, to work toward collective flourishing. He saw his role as emperor not as an opportunity for personal glory but as a sacred responsibility to serve the people of Rome, to make their lives better, to protect them from external threats and internal chaos. He did not see himself as above them but as one of them, simply in a different role, with different responsibilities, but no more valuable as a human being than the poorest citizen in the empire. This humility, this orientation toward service, shaped everything he did. It meant that he led by example rather than decree, that he endured the hardships of war alongside his soldiers rather than commanding from safety, that he made decisions based on what was right rather than what was politically advantageous. In our modern world, We have been sold a different narrative, that life is about personal success, about accumulating wealth and status and recognition, about standing out from the crowd and proving that you are special, that you are better than others, that you deserve more. We measure our worth by our achievements, our possessions, our social media metrics, our ability to consume and display and impress. And in chasing these things, we become hollow, because there is never enough success to feel truly successful, never enough recognition to feel truly seen, never enough stuff to feel truly satisfied. Marcus Aurelius would look at this cultural sickness and ask, what is it all for? When you die, will it matter how many followers you had, how much money you made, how impressive your resume looked? Or will the only thing that matters be the kind of person you were, the lives you touched, the good you did in the world? He didn't chase greatness, he practiced goodness until it became power, until it radiated from him not as something performed for others but as something that was simply who he was. The psychological shift here is profound. When you move from self-focus to service focus, from asking, what can I get, to asking, what can I give, your entire relationship with life transforms. Anxiety about your own status diminishes because you are no longer at the center of your own story, you are part of something larger, contributing to it, adding value to it, finding meaning not in what you receive but in what you offer. Depression lifts because you have a purpose beyond your own pleasure or pain, you are needed, you matter, not because of what you achieve but because of what you give. Loneliness fades because you are connected to others through genuine contribution rather than transactional relationships based on what they can do for you. Marcus understood that a life of pure self-interest is ultimately empty, that the pursuit of personal pleasure leads only to jaded dissatisfaction, that meaning comes not from taking but from giving, not from conquering but from serving. This does not mean becoming a doormat or sacrificing your own well-being. It means recognizing that your well-being is inextricably linked to the well-being of others, that you cannot be truly happy in a world of suffering, that the highest form of self-interest is actually a form of service, because in serving others you become the kind of person you can respect, the kind of person who sleeps well at night knowing they lived according to their values. This is the fifth habit, and it is the one that gives all the others meaning, because what is the point of mastering your mind, of practicing clarity and control and reflection and death awareness, if not to become someone who makes the world better by being in it? Marcus lived this until his last breath, and it is perhaps the most powerful habit of all, the one that transforms self-improvement into something genuinely noble, something that transcends the self and contributes to the flourishing of everyone you touch. Morning clarity, the practice of preparing your mind for reality before reality crashes into you. Control the controllables, the wisdom of releasing your grip on what was never yours to hold. Evening reflection, the habit of learning from each day rather than merely surviving it. Memento mori, the awareness of death that makes life infinitely more precious. Service over self, the orientation toward virtue and contribution that gives all the other habits meaning. These are the 5 habits that shaped Marcus Aurelius, that allowed him to rule an empire and himself simultaneously, that enabled him to face unimaginable challenges with a calm that seemed almost superhuman but was actually the result of daily practice, of returning again and again to these fundamental disciplines no matter how tired he was, no matter how overwhelming the circumstances, no matter how tempting it was to simply react rather than respond. The core message that echoes across 2,000 years is this: mastering your mind is not about achieving some permanent state of perfection where you never feel anxiety or anger or desire or fear. It is about returning to yourself, again and again, whenever you lose your center, whenever you get swept away by circumstances, whenever you forget who you want to be. Marcus himself struggled, he lost his temper, he felt overwhelmed, he made mistakes, but the difference between him and most people is that he had built these habits so deeply into his life that they became his anchor, the thing he could always return to when the storms threatened to capsize him. He didn't practice these habits because he had achieved enlightenment. He practiced them because he was human, because he knew how easy it was to lose yourself, and because he understood that the only way to maintain any semblance of peace in a chaotic world was to have a system, a set of daily practices that brought him back to clarity no matter how far he strayed. Tomorrow morning, before you touch your phone, before you allow the world to dictate the terms of your consciousness, touch your thoughts instead, sit with them, examine them, prepare them for the day ahead, and ask yourself who you want to be regardless of what the day brings. Throughout the day, when circumstances frustrate you, when people disappoint you, when things don't go according to plan, remember the dichotomy of control, remember that your power lies only in your response, only in your judgment, only in your character, and that everything else is theater, a show you can watch without being destroyed by. At night, before you collapse into distraction or sleep, take 10 minutes to reflect on your day, to ask yourself the hard questions about who you were and who you want to become, to treat each day as a learning opportunity rather than just another collection of hours to endure. Carry with you an awareness of death, not as something morbid but as something clarifying, as the thing that strips away the trivial and reveals what actually matters. And through it all, remember that the point of mastering your mind is not to become some isolated sage on a mountaintop, but to become someone who serves, who contributes, who makes the lives of others better by the simple fact of your presence and your choices. The happiness of your life depends on the quality of your thoughts, Marcus wrote, and in that single sentence he captured everything that matters. You cannot control the world, you cannot control other people, you cannot control circumstances, but you can control your mind, and your mind creates your experience of everything. Two people can face the exact same circumstances and have completely different experiences based solely on how they think about those circumstances, how they judge them, how they respond to them. Marcus Aurelius faced circumstances that would have destroyed most people, yet he maintained a peace and clarity that still inspires us centuries later, not because he had an easier life but because he had a trained mind, a mind that knew how to return to itself, how to find stillness in chaos, how to choose wisdom over reaction. This is available to you, not someday when your circumstances improve, not when you finally have enough time or money or security, but right now, today, in this moment, by beginning to practice these 5 habits that shaped an emperor and could reshape anyone willing to commit to them. As the sun sets on this exploration of Marcus Aurelius and his timeless wisdom, as his marble face dissolves into your own reflection, recognize that you are not separate from him, you are facing the same fundamental challenges, the same chaos, the same mortality, the same choice between being controlled by your circumstances or controlling your response to them. He left you a map, written in candlelight 2,000 years ago, never meant for your eyes but now illuminating your path nonetheless. The question is not whether his habits work, history has already answered that. The question is whether you will practice them, whether you will build them into your life until they become who you are rather than what you do, whether you will choose the difficult path of mastery over the easy path of reaction. The storm is coming, it is always coming, but you can meet it with a mind prepared, with a clarity forged in daily practice, with a peace that no external circumstance can take from you. This is the promise of Marcus Aurelius, this is the power of these 5 habits, and this is the life available to you if you are willing to do the work. The emperor ruled Rome, but first, he ruled himself. Now it is your turn.